So today we're going to be talking about Striker Fire semi-autos as duty pistols. Now Striker Fire semi-autos are very popular for use as police and security duty pistols, and there are a variety of reasons for that. Today we're going to look at some of the advantages of Striker Fire pistols for duty weapons for police and security, and also some of the disadvantages that a lot of people don't think about when they advocate exclusively for Striker Fire pistols. Stick around. Alright man, take a seat, buckle up. Ordinarily we'd start with orientation of the car here, but we got calls pending and we got to get to them. So we're rolling. We're going to have to learn on the way. Right, today. So the big advantage of Striker Fire pistols for police and security use is the fact that the trigger is the same every time you pull it. Whether it's at reset or all the way back from the front, the braking point is about the same, and the trigger reset is about the same, and the weight you have to apply to the trigger to get the gun to go off is about the same. Now, that's a big advantage for training people, because when we train people on handguns, there's a few things that we have to look into and a few things we have to address with people right up front, so that way they can get the most out of the gun and make the training as easy as possible. We have sight alignment, trigger control, and stance, or basically the ideal stance that we can then morph into stances that they can use while they're on the street, and that we can morph into them being able to shoot on the move later on. Now, trigger control with a Striker Fire is very easy in some ways and very hard in other ways. The way in which trigger control is easy is that it is always the same. So unlike double action and DASA pistols, where we have to teach two separate types of triggers and teach a transition between the different trigger types, with a Striker Fire, it's only one type of trigger, and basically it's like a really bad single action trigger, but without a safety. So you get some of the advantages of a single action and some of the advantages of a double action. But a lot like people talk about with 40 caliber rounds, there's two ways of looking at it. You can either look at the Striker Fire as the best of both worlds, the best of single action, where you have a consistent trigger and it's fairly light, and the best of a double action where you don't need a safety, or you don't need any external safety that you have to click off more accurately, and none of the disadvantages of a long, heavy trigger press or forgetting to click the safety off. The other way of looking at it is that they give you totally neither of the advantages. You don't have a nice, crisp, manageable trigger with the Striker Fire, and you don't have the long double action press that's harder to push. So depending on how you look at it, it's either the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds, depending on who you talk to and what your training methodology is. Now, if you're not brand new to the channel, you know from my duty belt video and a bunch of other videos on holsters that I use a lot of Striker Fire pistols for work. I happen to think that these are the best of both worlds if we have to make large numbers of compromises. Now, for police and security work, we know that most of the time, especially in a patrol or a single post type situation, the gun has to be very flexible. The handgun we use has to be a very flexible system that we can use for a lot of different purposes. This is my duty pistol that I use now. This is my old duty pistol. It's a Glock 22. It's what I would consider a compact size pistol, even though Glock considers it a full size. And this is my full size type pistol, even though Glock considers it like a competition or a tactical practical type of pistol. When I carry one of these for duty use, whether it's for security or police work, the reason I choose it is flexibility. Now, the handgun that we use if we're in patrol or we're doing security in a fixed post or a roving type of security detail where we might work in a housing complex or a large industrial environment has to be flexible, in that the gun has to be able to do a lot of things. In the same way that I think people very much confuse handgun ammunition selection for duty pistols, I think they also very much confuse selection of duty pistols. We don't select Striker Fire pistols because they're the best at any one thing, other than they're the best for training people on. We select them because they're equally good at a lot of different things that we may be called upon to do. For instance, for a duty pistol, it's not unusual for us to have to make a snapshot, to be able to pull the pistol from the holster and fire very quickly, sometimes with unaimed fire. Striker Fires don't have any of the disadvantages of a long trigger pull that's harder to manipulate under stress, or forgetting to take the safety off. Though that's mainly training issues, under stress we see a huge degradation in people's skill sets even when they're heavily trained. So if we want to hedge our bets, we can use a Striker Fire system that's a lot easier to remember how to use, even when that fight or flight starts kicking in. Another situation we may find ourselves in is having to shoot a very long distance. Many times we get stuck in positions when we have a critical incident. Let's say there's a barricaded gunman. You show up, you find your spot, it's 40 yards from where the threat is, and you're just kind of stuck with that spot. There's nowhere for you to go. Moving isn't a very good idea, or you don't have better cover. You have to be able to make those ranged shots. Well, where a single action pistol might be very good for making those types of ranged shots, we can still do pretty well with the striker fire if we're practiced, especially from behind cover and at a rest. So a striker fire system covers a lot of the bases that we have for situations we might get ourselves into when we're working with a duty pistol that's meant for patrolmen or for security. They also flex very easily, at least they tend to flex very easily with most brands between sizes of gun. Where I might want a full-size pistol, a Glock 35, Glock 34, or Glock 21, is a very large handgun with a long sight radius for working patrol. When I work in investigations or a plainclothes assignment, or I'm training someone in the final phases of field training and I want to carry a slightly smaller gun so I'm less high profile and it's easier to conceal, I can go to a compact Glock 22, Glock 17, or I can go down to a 19, or I can go down to a 26, 27 size pistol. These run the whole gamut of sizes, and the guns tend to stay pretty uniform in their function. Where the controls are, the reach to different things, unlike DASAs, double action only pistols, or revolvers, which tend to have huge size differences between different sizes of pistols in trigger reach and where the controls are laid out. Now, a lot of companies are getting better at this, but there's no denying that if you go with a major manufacturer of striker fire pistols, it's very likely that you're going to find that their compact guns, their subcompact guns, and their full-size guns, and their large competition pistols are all going to be about the same size form factor, about the same function, and about as easy to shoot, with very small differences mainly related to weight, balance, and sight radius. Striker fire pistols also, on average, tend to be less expensive. They tend to be made mainly of polymer. They tend to be made with a lot of stamped parts, a lot of cheap springs, and because they're cheaper, it's a lot easier for the individual officer, the individual guard, to get into a good striker fire pistol as opposed to a good DASA pistol. I talked about this a lot in my DASA video, where I talked about how a good DASA pistol can run you, $900 and up, $700 and up, and these generally for police and security guards tend to start at the $400 range, where you can get them on the Blue Line program. While there's a lot of different types of striker fire pistols, Glock tends to be the most common with regards to police and security work, although Smith & Wesson M&Ps, XDs are starting to come into their own in that market. And one of the reasons that people really like striker fires, and the reason that they're really good for police and security work, and a reason that you don't hear a lot of people talk about, especially on the internet, is that these can be user serviceable all the way down to individual components. Now, I had an incident a few years ago. We had a little thing called Snowmageddon here, where we got 18 inches of snow in the course of about 4 hours. And during that process, I was outside pushing cars pretty much all day, getting out of my car, pushing cars out of the middle of the street, trying to keep just a lane of traffic clear on major roads to be able to get ambulances and fire trucks through. And halfway through the day, I pulled this pistol, which is what I was using at the time, out of my holster and realized that the trigger guard was covered in snow, that the ejection port was covered in snow, that there was snow and ice all the way inside all of the major components of the gun. And I had to take that opportunity to go downstairs into our basement firing range and pop a couple rounds off to see if the gun would still work. And it still worked. That's not to say that that wouldn't be the case with a Sig Sauer or an HK. I'm sure they would also do fairly well, but at this price point, striker fires are very, very reliable. And because you can service them all the way down to their individual components at the end user level, I was able to take the gun completely apart, WD-40 the components, oil them, and put them all back together on my lunch break of only 45 minutes. Now, I don't see a lot of people doing that with an HK USP or a SIG P226. Those have a whole lot more components. They're not really user serviceable. You need a lot of specialized tools. With this, all you need is a brass punch and a little tiny screwdriver you can find in a multi-tool to take the entire system apart down to the individual components, the springs, the striker, the firing pin cups, those types of things. So these really excel at being duty pistols when you know you're going to be in harsh environments. And let's be honest, as patrolmen, if we're looking at a patrolman's duty pistol, someone that's just starting off on the job, that is a huge advantage because we know we're going to be outside in the snow, the rain, the heat, the sleet, all of that crap that fouls up guns and makes them very hard to clean. Now, striker fires, as I said before, are not without disadvantages. And one of the major disadvantages of striker fire pistols is that we have to be more careful of accidental discharges, of negligent discharges. We don't have an external safety on this. The trigger pull is fairly light, and if we get little toggles from our clothing, from jackets, caught inside the trigger guard, the gun can accidentally go off when we're going to reholster. So we have to be very careful about what holsters we buy and how we maintain those holsters. We've seen a lot of officer safety notices come out from different agencies talking about old holsters, old thumb snap type holsters, where if the thumb snap starts getting too worn, it can get caught in the trigger guard and cause the gun to go off when we don't want it to, when we're reholstering it. We get officer safety warnings all the time about little toggles that you have on jackets. I talked about this a lot in the DA and DAO and DISA for a duty pistol video. While double action only and DISA pistols are highly resistant to this problem because you can put your thumb on the back of the hammer, striker fires are a lot more susceptible to NDs when we're reholstering. And because of that, we have to be more careful when we're using them. Most of the other issues with choosing a duty weapon are pretty much a wash between striker fires and other semi-automatic pistol action types. Your magazine capacity really isn't an issue. Your sights are pretty available no matter what you have now. I mean, this isn't the late 90s where some guns you could get night sights on and some you couldn't. Companies have come a long way in doing that and taking care of the aftermarket on all types of different pistols, so some of that has kind of gone away. But it's still a lot cheaper to find accessories and a lot easier to find accessories that are in stock places for striker fire pistols. And I attribute that mainly to the amount of volume in striker fire pistols that stores do and the amount of people that choose these as duty pistols and for concealed carry. Now, this is the last video in a series of videos, or at least I hope it's the last video in a series of videos that I'm naming as a duty weapon. We did revolver as a duty weapon up there. We did double action, single action, and DAO as a duty pistol up there. We did single action as a duty pistol down there, and now we've got this video here. So if you haven't seen them all, go take a look. Click on the little links up here or up here in the corner, and keep these things in mind if you're thinking about choosing a duty pistol or switching from one action type to another, or if you're switching agencies that insist that you have one action type over another action type. There's a lot of safety concerns and a lot of usage concerns that we don't normally think about when we go to just a single instructor who has a single action type that they prefer, and then we discount all of the other action types. It's important to see the totality of what we're dealing with and what we're talking about when we're talking about duty pistols. If you like this type of content, go check out the Patreon page. You can see on the Patreon page a bunch of behind the scenes video. In fact, I did a behind the scenes video of how I'm shooting this today, and you help me make content like this and make it better. So if you like the messages I'm sending about law enforcement and about responsibility and reasonableness in police work and security work, check out the Patreon page and the different rewards levels we have up there. There's a bunch of different levels of support you could do, and honestly, I'm only really asking for $1, just a little $1 thank you that will help me upgrade my equipment and make more stuff for you more often. You guys be safe, and we will see you next week. I'd like to thank all the Patreon supporters, and especially the shift supervisor level Patreon supporters that we have listed here. Your contributions are what allows free field training to continue on and become better. Thank you. Well, if you like that video, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a whole lot more to come. As soon as I finish up these calls, go 10-8. County 291. 291.